on Pasha of the week, and as I mentioned all the time, that primarily it's based on the Rebbe's Sichos. And then we will try and translate it in English, so to speak, in a manner that pertains to us. This Sikha is based on the Rambam that speaks about the Beis HaMikdash. And the reason it is in today's Pasha, because in the mitzvah to build the Beis HaMikdash actually is in today's Pasha. I'm sure you learned it, that after you didn't go into the soil, ultimately there will be a chosen place, and there you will build the Beis HaMikdash. And so the Rebbe explains this Rambam as the Rebbe would do in an extremely fine, insightful way. And we will go through this quickly, and Mitzvah try to draw from it also something pertinent for ourselves. The Rambam that the Rebbe is essentially explaining, basing his Sikha on, was the Rambam says that the Mikdash, referring to Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, was not uneven ground. We may have learned it during the annual learning in the 3 weeks. It was uneven ground. It was not uneven ground. The Rambam describes the various sections, and as one proceeds from the beginning and further up, at various intervals, he will encounter steps, maybe 12 steps, 15 steps, 1 step, different levels of gradation, until finally he will reach into the sanctuary, so to speak, into the Heichal itself. And in the Heichal itself, there are also 3 sections, but those sections are all on the same uneven ground, all on the same level. All the way from the Ulam, and then there is the Mokim HaKodesh, and then Kodesh HaKodoshim, which is the inner sanctuary where the Oren was standing. All that is on an even ground. There's no steps between them. And the Rebbe goes on. You with me so far?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Rebbe goes on and explains that the principle in this, that the Rambam explains that the Mikdash was not on even ground, but it was on Ma'ala Zahor, it was on a constant gradual rise in different sections. This is to express, to point out that there are different levels of Kedusha, different levels of holiness throughout this entire expanse, from the Har Habayis into the Chel, into the Azorah, and so forth. And each time that there is a higher level of Kedusha, then that too brings about that it goes up physically also steps, a given number of steps. And thus, if this is the principle that the Rambam is expressing, that because there are differences in the various madrigas, that brings about that there will be different levels physically. Then we have a really phenomenal question, the Kodesh HaKodoshim, the Holy of Holies, which clearly is in a category by itself, this is so remote in terms of Kedusha that no one ever enters that place except once a year the Kohen Gadol and Kippur. The other places, every day they was doing Avodah, there was in Ktoivos and so forth. And here, this was a totally inaccessible place. And yet, here there was no physical distinction. It's really boggles the mind. Why over here there is no physical distinction? Just to complement the whole thing, not to skip any important aspects of the Sikh, I just want to point out, the Rebbe also explains why is it that in the Beis HaMikdash there were these distinctions on the physical rise, on the mountain, but different levels of Kedusha were on different level physically. Whereas in the Mishkan, also representing the Mishkan, there was Hamikdash. The first Hamikdash essentially was the Mishkan in the desert, and basically all the various sections in the Hamikdash were also represented in the Mishkan, and yet in the Mishkan everything was on an even ground. And we didn't have in the Mishkan this requirement that there would be on a hill and should rise up afterwards. And this Indian the Rebbe explains, and I said I didn't want to skip it because it's a very insightful and deep opinion. The Rebbe explains that there's a primary difference between the Mishkan and the Hamikdash. The Mishkan was a temporary tent. Eden would encamp in a certain area, and while they were encamping there, the Mishkan stood there. Then when they were moved, they would dismantle the Mishkan, and they would pack it up and move elsewhere. And this place where the Mishkan stood did not retain any Kedusha. It didn't stay holy because the Mishkan was there once. It went back to being a desert like every other place in the desert. Whereas the Beis HaMikdash is different. The Beis HaMikdash was a place that Hashem chose. And this place itself became a holy place. On the contrary, because this place was a holy place, this is why the Beis HaMikdash stood there. And the halacha is, as the Rambam says, that in the holy place of the Beis HaMikdash, this Har HaMoriah where the Beis was built, in that place you can be makrif korbanos, even though you're not allowed to be makrif korbanos outside of the Beis HaMikdash. It has to be only in the Beis HaMikdash. But while the Beis HaMikdash is hoarded, while it's destroyed, you are still allowed to be makrif korbanos in that place. It doesn't. Even if the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, you can, in the place itself, you can be makrif korbanos. You can be offering as sacrifices. This is one or the reasons that we are careful not to be close to that area out of Pesach. Because out of Pesach, you're chayav to bring a korban Pesach. So by korban Pesach, if you are at a distance from the place, you're exempt. If you're far away, you're exempt. But if you're in the place and you're not makil korban, then on the korban Pesach, then it's kodesh. It's a very severe consequence. So if someone happens to be in the Beis HaMikdash place at the time when the korban Pesach is supposed to be makil, then it's a whole question. And he can be makil, in fact, because of various reasons. So then it becomes obligatory, and you cannot fulfill this obligation, and it could be something which with severe consequences. This is why we're careful at that moment not to be in that particular area. In other words, the very place itself, the mountain itself, has a kedusha, has a level, this is the place of kedusha. The Beis Hamikdash was built in that place because this was the place that Hashem chose. Therefore, since that the very place, the ground itself, this is what is the basis of the Beis Hamikdash. It's part of the Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash. This is why the Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash was reflected not only in the various sections of the Beis Hamikdash, but on the ground itself. The various levels of Kedusha were reflected in the ground itself. That those levels that are of a lower level of Kedusha, but are lower physically, and those parts of it that are a higher level of Kedusha were physically high. Because the ground itself also represented the entire structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Coming to the question I mentioned before, which is really a very interesting question. How come the Kodesh HaKodoshim are not distinguished from the rest of the Beis Hamikdash physically like everything else? In explaining this, Rebbe points out another interesting inyan in this Rambam. And the Rambam says that the Beis Hamikdash was not all on even ground, and there were various levels. He does not merely say that there were different levels. He expresses it, he describes it in a very interesting way. Rambam says, as a person enters the Har HaBayis, he's constantly speaking about a person walking through the Har HaBayis. As one enters Har HaBayis, there's a certain distance that he will walk on even ground. Then he will encounter a certain number of steps. Then he will walk further on even ground. Then he'll encounter another number of steps, and so forth. In other words, he is kind of describing the Beis Hamikdash, not just physically describing its structure and the rising of the various sections, but describing it from the perspective of a person's visit, so to speak, a person's journey through the Beis Hamikdash, going through the Beis Hamikdash. And again, this is kind of odd that you describe the Hamikdash. Why describe it in the form of how you would experience your walk through the Beis Hamikdash? Describe the Beis Hamikdash the way it is. Therefore, the Rebbe says that this is a point which the Rambam actually intends to, so to speak, to hint, in order that we should further understand all of these different levels, including the fact that the Kodesh HaKodoshim is not distinct in the form in levels. And that is that in fact these various rises, they represent the various levels of Kedusha in the Beis Hamikdash. And they also represent the various levels of rise that a person experiences as he goes through the Beis Hamikdash, and as we will see also, as one is doing his own Aveda on the personal level, on the personal basis, rising through the various levels that a person has to go to struggle through his own rise beruchnis. So, the Rambam is explaining that as a person is rising coming from outside into the Har HaBayis, he rises a certain amount. Then he goes a little further up and rises a certain amount. Each rise represents another higher state of holiness, and a higher state of holiness means a higher state of ruchnius, less gashmis, less physicality, less worldliness, and more godliness. The further a person goes, the more aware he becomes of godliness, and the less he is aware of his own physicality, his own worldliness, and so forth. And the point, therefore, that I'm going to say on this, as one goes through the various levels of the Mizamigdash, and he rises continually from one stage to the other, the Ruchnis, there are many different stages that he goes through. And each time, as he rises up, he becomes more refined and more connected, more united with the Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash, and less, so to speak, self-aware, more aware of the Kedusha, because that's the only way that you can become aware of Kedusha, if you become less self-aware or aware of your own physicality. Until, this is a continuous rise, until one reaches the sanctuary itself, so to speak, the Heichal, and then within the Heichal it goes from one place to the other, all the way into Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, at that level, when one walks through the sanctuary into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there is an element of rising, of elevation. But it's a different kind of elevation. There's an elevation that one can actually understand and relate to intellectually. But he senses, okay, this is this level, this is that level, this is that level. He can relate to it and understands the difference between this level and that level. This is still that experience that is still, so to speak, can be contained in a person's intellect. Then one reaches the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Kodesh HaKadoshim, there is no way that the human mind can fathom. Fathom means can surmise, can relate to. In the entire Beis Hamikdash, the Gemara says, actually it's in Pirkei Avos. If you say Pirkei Avos last Shabbos, that's what we said, one of these things. That on a constant basis, there were 10 miracles in the Beis Hamikdash. I mean, these were miracles that the naked eye can observe. And it's a miracle that says, hey, this is not natural. That smoke should go up straight without being affected by the wind. It's totally not natural. Don't understand how it happens. If it rains and the rain doesn't affect the fire, an open fire in this there, it doesn't make any sense. So these are miracles. But nevertheless, these are miracles that the human being can kind of relate to. He says it's miraculous, it's not natural. But I know what happened. In other words, there was rain and the wind didn't affect the fire. There was a wind and the wind didn't affect the smoke. So this it's definitely a godly miracle. But it is not totally self-contradictory. It is not totally removed from a worldly description. We can describe what it is. In our words, we can describe what it is. There was a smokestack, right? There was smoke coming out from the Mizbeach, and the wind didn't touch it. So we can imagine it. We don't understand how it happened, but we can imagine it. But that which took place in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is totally beyond human conception. Now, which we cannot even describe it in words because we are going in circles. One of the things that the Gemara says about the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it really boggles the mind. It's not no way that we can grasp it. But this is, so to speak, this is a godly revelation in the Beis Hamikdash. And I'm discussing this in this detail because I want to then come back to ourselves. And the whole thing is primarily, to face ourselves a little bit. So it says that there was the Oren HaKodesh, which contained the Luchos. Everybody knows what that's like, right? The box, the Luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down from Har Sinai were placed in this box. On top of this box there was a kapeirus with the kruvim. And the Oren was made, it's described right there in the Chumash, it was made from wood and gold. And it had a given size, 2.5 amos wide, and an amma wide, and so forth. Wide and an amma depth. It had exact size, exact measurements. And this was placed in the middle of the Kodesh HaKodashim, middle of the area of the Kodesh HaKodashim, which was 20 amos wide and 20 amos deep, 20 by 20. And the expression the Gemara says that Mokim ha'orein einoi min ha'nido, which means that the place of the Orein did not take up any of the room of the Kodesh HaKodashim, which is beyond, we can't even speak about how it's made. Is it there or is it not there? Is it visible or is it not visible? Is it wood or is it not wood? It is absolutely wood, and it has a certain size, and you can see it, but it doesn't take up any room. Mokim ha'orein einoi min ha'nido. There's a similar description of the Oren, but not at that level, a little bit of a lesser degree. What the Gemara says, actually it says in the Tanakh, that Eden had to cross the Yarden. And to cross the Yarden, the Jordan, to cross with Yeshua, to cross the Yarden going into Eretz Yisrael. So it's described in Tanakh as follows: that the Levim were carrying the Oren on holding these poles that the Oren was attached to, and they stepped into the waters of the Yarden. As they stepped into the waters of the Yarden split. Just like by Kriyas Yamsuf, the water split. The water split. And the Kohanim stood there in the waters while all the Yidden crossed the Yarden in dry land. What? They stood in the back. They waited until all the Yidden crossed the Yarden in dry land. Then they stepped back out of the Yarden. They stepped back onto the shore. The waters returned. And the Oren carried them across the Yarden. That's what it says.
They flew into the
Yarden. Yeah, he carried them across the Yarden. And the expression in the Gemara is Ha'oren noisei as noisov, which means the Oren carries his carriers. Those Kohanim, the Levim that carried the Oren, they were carried actually by the Oren. Noisei as noisov. So this is also a kind of a miracle that is in a category by itself. But the biggest thing is in the Kodesh HaKodashim. This is not a miracle in the form that you can talk about a miracle, because you can't even describe it. So it says in Chassidus that all miracles represent a godly revelation, a godly presence in the world. That's what the miracle is. By Harsin, by Kriyas Yamsuf, by Kriyas Yamsuf, when the water split, the Gemara says that all the Yidden were able to see the godly presence. This is why in the Os Yoshim, in the Shira on Os Yoshim, which even said upon crossing the Yamsuf, that said, Ze Keli V'Anveil, this is my God, and I will glorify him. So the Gemara says, Ze means that he's pointing with the finger. In other words, they're able to see with their physical eyes godliness, which is totally not the common thing. So any miracle is in fact an element, an aspect of a godly revelation in the world. Now, godly revelation in the world, even though, yes, the world conceals godliness and so forth, but we all learn, we all understand, we all believe and recognize intellectually that in fact, no matter how much the world conceals godliness, nevertheless we recognize that the world itself is also a big miracle. The whole existence of the world is a miracle. And what is life and what is a soul, what are all these things we can understand. There are many things in our own experience that we can understand. No matter how much we experience it, there's no way. We don't know what it means, what life is, and what all the various capabilities a human being has. We don't understand it. This is also a godly miracle. But there are different levels of godly cognizance, godly revelation in the world. And in general, there are different levels, obviously, but there is a general distinction, that which is represented by the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. That is in a category by itself. And this categorical distinction is that, what Chassidus explains, there's a difference between the godly oil, the godly light, and godliness itself. That it actually explained that the Mashiach will come, and there will be the ultimate Gilui, the ultimate redemption, and will be Tchias HaMeisim. Then, in fact, it's going to be a different world. In what way? It will be that the godly presence in the world will be at a level, but we say it is not a godly revelation, but it is the actual godly presence. This is what will be revealed in the world. Now again, I'm not expecting that we should understand this, but we learn enough Chassidus to understand the differences in the various levels. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim, this is the level that was revealed in Kodesh HaKadoshim. The same level that will be revealed when, after all the work and all the effort of the Golus and the Geulah Shlema, this is what took place in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Being that this is in a category all by itself, and this is not something that a person, that a human being can relate to with his intellect. It's not something that one can rise to. This is something that a person relates to by simply being awed and recognize this is completely out of the world, not something that he can relate to and describe. This is why this does not have it does not have the element that a person rises to it, another step of rise. A person cannot rise to it. This is something which we relate to only with what we call emunah, with the purest element in the person, where his intellect completely dissipates. Dissipates means it's completely lost. It's not based on understanding. It's based on recognition of the truth. Now, all this really sounds extremely fantastic. And he also agrees that he doesn't understand it. He also join me. I also don't. No, but what is the point of this? This is the important element here. Every human being, every one of us, has an intellect. And in the intellect, we have different levels. Everybody recognizes that we have different levels of our intellect, intelligence. There is, as we always speak, there is what's called chitzonius haseichel. What's chitzonius haseichel? External. External, superficial seichel. External. External means that I can figure out that if there is a table over here, I cannot put another table on the same place. And I have two tables, I have to put them one next to each other. Tov seichel. If you want to put things up, you have to put them in a certain order. This is something which is what's called chitzonius, because you are organizing something that is external, that exists on a physical level, and you can figure out how to organize it, how to put things together. This is the kind of seichel that one learns from experience. As a matter of fact, it's possible for one to try one way, it doesn't work, try it another way, try another way, until you find a way that it works. This is not a seichel that you say it emanates from his soul. It represents a soul. Many times I point out that there's a certain degree of smart, and people today are all taken aback by the fact that some animals are so smart. Animals are so smart. They can find their way, from a distance, find his way back home, or whatever it is. So this is what's called practical seichel, chitzonius. It is not representative of an insight, not representative of any kind of a higher perspective, of a human element. Then there is another level of seichel, which is more of a self-contained element. Like, for instance, this is the example that I use many times, and I hope you will understand the significance of this. Very simple. You stand on the subway platform. Everybody knows what a subway platform looks like, right? Subway platform, and the train comes, and the doors open. Some people have to leave, come out of the cars, and some people go into the cars. So, now there's a clash. The people who are coming out of the cars are coming this way. People are entering into the cars going this way. So what are you going to do? That they shouldn't collide, right? What are you going to do? So I'd like you should follow this thought. There are two ways of looking at it. One way is, look, it's practical that you should let the people off first, because after all, you have to go in there. You have to take up their place. If you go in there, then there's no room for you, right? You have to let them off, and then go in. So practically speaking, that is a logical thing. it's more practical to let them off first and then you go in. So this is simply a practical thing. Then there is another element in this. Not just because of the practice that you shouldn't collide with the other person, but simply from a human perspective, from the perspective of self-respect. You don't walk into another person. Right? You stand aside and let him go through and then you go. This is from a perspective of human respect, not from a practical perspective. But just this is an element of seichel. This is called human seichel. A human a sense of self-respect. The same is, I point out, everybody, from childhood on, we all learn to sit by the table and eat with a fork and spoon. Not to put our mouth and our face into the plate and eat from the plate. Okay? So one could say, you know what, you shouldn't eat from the plate because if you eat from the plate, you get all dirty. It's a practical reason. Your clothes will get dirty, your face will get dirty. But really, I'm sure everybody recognizes that that is not the whole reason. It's simply much more respectful to sit back and feed yourself with a spoon instead of putting your face into the plate. This concept, to understand that there's a human element, nothing to do with the practicality of it, just that there's a human element, this is already an element of seichel. There is no way to explain that. What is behind it? This is a neshama thing. Because you have a human soul, this is why you recognize this value. This is not, there's no way to explain it externally, practically. It's just a sense of a value element. This seichel, even though it's on a very low and simple level, it nevertheless already represents something greater. It represents some kind of a different type of a soul. This seichel truly emanates from the human soul. And if you see a person eating by putting his face into the plate, you don't say, "Oh, why are you getting yourself dirty?" What do you say? Why are you eating like an animal? What? You don't say you're getting yourself dirty, because that's not the real consequence. You're insulting. You're eating like an animal. I mean, I'm a human being, but you're eating like an animal. You don't have the sense of human self-respect to eat and eat like a human being. So here we are beginning to recognize a true sense of what seichel is. It's not a practical expediency, so to speak. It's something that truly represents the soul, the human soul.
Is there anything that you can't explain and many times are on a higher level?
Sorry?
Is there anything that you can't explain many times are on a higher level, just like the creation production? That's like the point you get.
1 second. Just as we understood this simple level, but here we can clearly identify and see the distinction between looking at it from a non-seichel level of view and looking at it from a seichel. A bar seichel will see it differently than someone who doesn't have that sensitivity. Once we recognize this, then we can further recognize that there are many, many different concepts that actually are revealing to us an insight that comes directly from the soul. not just because of practical consequences. Going further, and this is mentioned many times, don't steal. Don't steal. So there is one approach. If somebody says you mustn't steal, you know why? Because if you steal, you're going to get caught and thrown in jail. As long as you don't get caught, it's okay. What do you think of such a logic? Good logic.
So I'm going to come back to you in the end.
Sorry?
If you treat that like it's okay as long as I don't get caught, it's going to come back to you in the end in some way or another.
You're going to get caught.
Right. I mean, like my past. I mean, there's a lot of things I got away with.
No. Don't confess it here. No. My point is that when we think about this, my point is not the plan. That we think about it and we realize this is a misunderstanding of the whole concept. This is not the point. A human being does not steal because there's a human value to life. It's not just not getting caught. Even if you're guaranteed not to get caught, what kind of thing is this? This is what's called seichel mushi on the human level. We know that steal is a transgression of the Torah. Do not steal is one of the 10 Commandments, which means that it's on par with I'm your God. Which means that this is why I'm going gradually, like in the Beis Hamikdash, we go from one step to the other, to understand that there are different levels of seichel. There's a level of seichel where you recognize that on the human level you should not steal, and not because you're going to get caught, but because it's subhuman. It's improper. And then there is a higher level where you recognize that this is an offense not just to the human being, it's an offense to the godly presence in the world. It's a completely different thing. You're actually offending the creation, what the creation represents, the godly presence. In Chelm, you heard of in Poland there was a city called Chelm. Huh? Yeah, Chelm. This is traditionally Chelm were very shrewd people. So there were a whole bunch of stories built around the Chelm Chacham. The wise men of Chelm, and that created a whole literature of funny stories about the Chelm wisdom. Okay, how exactly it started, I really don't know, but this is a widespread kind of thing. The whole literature, the books, the stories of Chelm. So in Chelm, there was a predicament. In the winter, one night, beautiful snow fell down, and it covered all the dirt. It was a beautiful white, perfect white cover over the entire city. And it was too beautiful to disturb. What are you going to do? The first one who will be disturbing it will be the shamash, the sexton. The shamash has to go around early in the morning, knock on people's windows to wake them to go to shul. So now the predicament is, how is the shamash going to get around to wake all the people and disturb this beautiful snow? Disturb the beautiful snow. Hello?
Didn't have ice like
You asked me 1 second.
Yeah.
What did you ask me?
Was it disturbing?
Huh?
Yes,
Oh, it's the snow, right? It's the snow blankets. What are you going to do? So, as usual among wise people, what do? You set up council. You know what council is? You call all the wise men together at a meeting, and each one voices an opinion, and they discuss it, and after a long discussion, you come to a conclusion. And usually that conclusion has to be the wisest the combination of all things. What was the conclusion of the wise men of Chol? Very simple. They will put the shamash on the table, and 4 people will carry the table through the streets. That way, the shamash is not going to have to walk in the beautiful snow. Okay. So the point is that there is the sense, and the Torah tells us, that do not steal is a godly offense. It's an offense against the godly presence in the world. It's a completely different concept than not being caught. And it's also a completely different concept than being, so to speak, offensive to the human respect. These are the various levels that a person can rise, so to speak, spiritually, and recognize deeper and deeper and greater insights, being much more and more sensitive to the reality of the world, the godly reality in the world. For instance, you sit in shul, and somebody takes a sefer Torah out, carries a sefer Torah. What happens? Everybody stands up. Right? Everybody stands up. Nothing will happen if you sit. But this is you recognize, how can I sit and sefer Torah is up? This is not, so to speak, a human respect. This is respect for the holiness of the Sefer Torah. All of these different levels, these are different levels of sensitivity that a person has, intellectual sensitivity, really emanating and drawn from his soul. If in his soul he did not have this respect, this sense of godliness, of holiness, then you couldn't explain to him why you have to stand up for the Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah doesn't get insulted. It doesn't even see whether I'm standing or sitting. Rashi says in the Mizbeach, you learn in the Mizbeach that the Mizbeach was pretty tall, pretty high up, by 10 amos. So how does you go up in the Mizbeach? So the Pasuk says you're not allowed to make steps to go up. How do you go up to the Mizbeach? On a ramp. Why? Rashi says because the Pasuk says because when you make a step, you're spreading your legs, and that's disrespectful to the stone. The stone, Rashi right away explains it. The stone is insensitive. Wait a second, the stone is insensitive, it's true, but look, this is a stone that leads you to the Mizbeach. And you sense, no, this is not in this as simple stone. It's not a question of offending the stone, it's a question of offending what the stone stands for. Thus, this discussion gives us an understanding. So when we speak about sensitivity, a human sensitivity, intellectual sensitivity, godly sensitivity. All these things are very real. And this is incumbent. Incumbent means it's a required. It's something that we also make an effort to recognize and become more and more sensitive to. Because this is what it means to open up one's mind and open up one's heart and be in touch with one's soul. And a human being who says, the secretary can't see me, it doesn't bother me. So we say he is lacking a certain insight. Farkas wouldn't allow a certain insight into the secretary. Which means that his seichel hasn't been developed to the point where he's in touch with his neshama. Right? His seichel is on the physical level. You only can see, if he gets caught, then you shouldn't be still. You only can see the lowest level. So, these are the various levels of the Beis HaMikdash that the Rambam describes. As you walk through the Mikdash, and as you rise, so to speak, through the various levels of your own Aveda, one learns Alabais, one learns Ibra, one learns Chumash, one learns Chassidus, and so forth. Throughout this entire journey, the entire development, one becomes more and more open and sensitive to the insights and to the concepts that are being exposed therein. All of that development is not something that we are just creating, okay, learn this, learn that. All of that is actually, as we said before, an opening to one's soul. If not for the fact that we have a human soul, we would never understand it. Never understand it. There's absolutely no way.
Human soul or godly soul?
A human soul, as I said before, a human soul on a human level, in terms of human respect, like I said, in terms of how you eat, that's a human soul. And the godly soul is infinitely superior. But this is a real soul experience, that's my point. It's not merely, you were told to do that, okay, that's how you're supposed to do it. You have to understand, if not for that soul, we would not understand it. It would not make sense. Thus, once you recognize this, recognize that there is a gradual rise, and you recognize that this rise, throughout the whole process of this rise, this is a real experience. This is not just training. Training, I was once discussing children, chinuch of children, with a couple. A young couple came to me and they said they have children, and they were explaining to me they had some difficulty in chinuch. So they were describing, as they were describing to me, they expressed themselves, we tried so hard to train our children to be the best that it should be. And how come it's not working out? Whatever and so forth. So after they finished describing all the things that we tried to do and how come they have done, I said, look, you made one major mistake. A cat and a dog you train. A human being you teach. Training a human being doesn't work. What's the difference between training and teaching? Training means, look, you do this because that's the way you do it. You have no understanding why. Like a dog, you train home trainer a dog. House training a dog. What is a house trainer? That the dog should not dirty the house. He doesn't know the difference. But he's trained that if he does it, he gets patched, and if he goes out into the street, then and into the field, he gets his reward. Until he gets trained, he knows. He doesn't know. It's automatic. He won't do it in the house. But he doesn't know the difference. Doesn't know the difference. This is a house. It makes no difference. A human being, a child, you don't train. You teach. Why teach? Teach is a different thing. Teach is that he understands what you're telling him because he can relate to it. Because he has a human soul, and as you said, he has a godly soul. And the whole point of training, point of raising children, is to reveal his soul, so that he will be a full-fledged human being, not just in action, but in actual thought and experience and feeling and a sense of value of life. It's a completely different thing. And this is what the Rambam is describing over here, and what the Midrash demonstrates. There are many different levels, but we have to know. Yes, we have to go all through all these levels. Then there is an ultimate level. This is what's called the Kodesh HaKadosh. And there's an ultimate level in each one of us in our soul, which we cannot capture in our intellect, which is beyond intellectual recognition, understanding. There's an element in our soul, an element that in our subconscious, so to speak, in our consciousness beyond understanding, what's called emunah. We know a truth that we cannot describe. We know a truth that we cannot understand. Like the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that a Yid, Rahman Yitzlan, can be transgressing on all mitzvahs in the Torah. He doesn't know anything about Yiddishkeit. He was never raised in it. And then, God forbid that he is faced with a challenge of converting to, dropping his religious identity and go to something else, he'll give his life away. Mesiras Nefesh, he'll give his life away. What's in that? Why is he giving life away? What's the difference? Till now, you lived like you didn't live like a Jew. Not Kashrus, not Shabbos, there's nothing. All of a sudden, nothing doing. Because there's an element in our soul. It's very important to understand. And this is the source of all the other aspects. Because, and deep down, this element where we know, and in our soul we know only the absolute truth, the absolute godly truth. And everything worldly completely fades from presence, from value. This is why we can relate to concepts in our world, and we cannot understand them. What's the difference how you eat? What's the difference how you talk? What's the difference if you stand up and don't stand up? And yet, somehow it makes sense. Because we actually do have a perception, we know clearly, that this physical world is not the end of the story. This is not the reality. There's a spiritual reality that the whole world is subservient to and represents. And no matter how contradictory it may seem that this physical world, it makes no difference. It makes a big difference, to the point where sometimes I'm ready to give my life for it. This is what's called the Kodesh HaKadoshim within our soul. This is not something that we can possibly understand. We can't even attempt to understand. It's beyond understanding. But it's important to recognize this is the source of all our understanding. Anything that does make sense intellectually is because of this truth. Otherwise, if we were oriented exclusively on the basis of the physical world, none of this would make sense. Nothing. Don't tell me how to eat. I want to eat the way I want to eat. I like to eat like a cat. Big deal. Makes no difference. So this is a point in the soul, in the human soul, a point in the Vizanikus that is beyond understanding, and therefore you don't rise to that. This is just always present. This is just a plain reality. You don't rise to it to be able to understand it and grasp it and make another step. This is beyond understanding. This is the reality of the soul itself. This reality is what gives presence and what gives strength, gives us the ability to follow through on that level, those levels that we do understand. On those levels that we do understand intellectually, and okay, it could be done this way and that, but I want to do it this way. Why? Because somehow I feel there's more truth in this than in that. Essentially, this is the aim. This is the basis. This is the core of Chassidus, core of Torah in general, and the Chassidus in particular. The very second Perek in Tanya, the very first Perek in Tanya, by the way, introduces you to two souls. Souls? What's a soul? What's a soul? I never saw one. Once you start learning, you see, yeah, I did see one. It's real. I have Taivas, I have Daiva, and I also have Avas Hashem, Avas Yisrael. It's real. This is the reality of our life. This is what we're all about. This is what the yeshiva is all about. And this is the greatest blessing that we can possibly have, to recognize more and more and more, higher and higher, until we come to recognize the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's the reality itself in us that can carry us under all circumstances. We can withstand any temptation. Because we have a godly truth within just right within us. Each one of us, we learn, things should begin to make sense. We should be able to absorb and relate to them, and grow with them, and grow with them, and grow with them, until we come to Kodesh HaKadoshim. I don't need to understand, I know the truth. This is called the Munah. In our class we discussed the Munah a lot. This is the meaning of a healthy human being, and it's the meaning primarily a healthy Yid and a healthy Chassid. So I'll be Matzliach following through on this day.
I'm thinking that the smoke rising and the wind not blowing it, that also seems like contradictory.
Why? I can describe it to you. The other is indescribable.
It doesn't make sense.
No, it can't. It doesn't make sense, but you can imagine it.
I can imagine. Like,
look, the artist displays it very simple. Right? There's a smokestack and it's standing still. Anything that you can conceptualize, you can conceptualize it. You don't understand it, you can draw that.
So you can see it with your eyes.
What?
The art is not taking it.
Not taking up space, no way.
You measure it and then you measure that and you see that.
No, but that's
that is the case.
no, but you can't put it together.
But they make stuff like that nowadays. They have technology. They have technology that you could see something at the same time it's not there. It's called I forgot what you call it. Fourth dimension drawing. Pop shot. It's there at the same time.